Doug Ford's popularity, shaky 1 year out from election. How much does it matter? In 2022, some Ontarians will grade the Premier's pandemic performance with their ballots. Ontario is just over a year out from its next election, and Premier Doug Ford's popularity has dropped significantly in recent polls as voters grow increasingly dissatisfied with his government's pandemic response. But will this spring's poor polling rule out Ford's re-election next spring? Experts say it's possible but unlikely. His numbers have dropped significantly, and those numbers do make you sit up and notice, said Will Stewart, a political strategist with Hill plus Knowlton Strategies. On the flip side, Ford's popularity was riding way higher during the pandemic than it was pre-pandemic for a time as well. Ford enjoyed a boost in popularity early in the pandemic, having sat at under 40% approval for most of the year before, but has been heavily criticized during Ontario's third wave for his government's inability to prevent and properly respond to it. Ford's government loosened restrictions in February against the advice of the Ontario COVID-19 Science Table, waited until more than a year into the pandemic to create a provincial paid sick leave program, and opted not to prioritize essential workers earlier in the province's COVID-19 vaccine rollout. His government's response to COVID-19 in Ontario's long-term care sector was recently characterized as slow and reactive by the COVID-19 Long-Term Care Commission. Recent polls by Abacus Data, the Angus Reid Institute and Innovative Research Group show Ontarians are increasingly dissatisfied with Ford's handling of the pandemic. A survey conducted by Abacus Data in late April, after Ford announced playground closures and sweeping new powers for police on April 16 and then reversed those changes, found the number of Ontarians with a negative impression of the Premier was higher than at any other point in the pandemic. At 46%, Ford, the survey found, had managed to anger people at both ends of the political spectrum. An April 23 report by the Angus Reid Institute found 67% of survey respondents said he was doing a poor job of handling the pandemic, and 43% said the provincial government was at fault for not having prevented the third wave, compared to 23% who blamed the federal government and 32% who blamed both equally. Another late April survey by Innovative Research Group found 57% of respondents attributed April's spike in COVID-19 cases to Ford's decision to loosen restrictions in February against the advice of health advisors. But Ford's approval might still be higher than the 31% rating he held going into the pandemic, and whether his latest performance prevents the Premier from winning a second term will depend on how the next 12 months go for Ford, his political rivals and Ontario, says David Coletto, CEO and founding partner of Abacus Data. Coletto pointed out that, among the Liberal, New Democrat and Green parties, none currently appear strong enough to consolidate the share of votes necessary to defeat the Progressive Conservatives. I think Ford has an advantage right now, in that even though his negatives have risen, he has a solid core to start, and so he needs to find 3 or 4 percentage points more people to vote for him to get back into clear majority territory, whereas the two other parties, I think, are struggling, he said. Right now, there is no clear alternative in people's minds because it's muddled, and it's divided between the opposition parties. Despite having an incumbent's advantage, Coletto believes Ford will need to work hard in the coming months to right some of his government's wrongs and steer Ontario to safety, especially now, when voters are so highly attuned to provincial politics. The difference about today versus any other moment in history is that people are paying far more attention to provincial politics than they ever would, Coletto said. Because the decisions of the province always affect people's lives. but never more so than today.